When it comes to buying a new bike, there's a million and one different things to choose from. You've got drivetrain, you've got wheels, and you've got, of course, the big one, material.
Yep, carbon or aluminium are the two most popular choices for bike frames, so it can be confusing. There's pros and cons for both, but today we're going to talk you through those because we've got two very similar bikes, one in carbon, one in aluminium.
So let's kick things off with price then first, Neil. Now, there's a few reasons why carbon is more expensive than aluminium. Manufacturing processes and raw materials do cost more.
Yeah, carbon frames are built in very expensive moulds and they need a different one for every size of the frame they make as well. But a great way to check the disparity in price is to check a brand that has the same build but one in a carbon version and one in aluminium.
Take this Orbea or Alma, for example. They make an aluminium version called the H20 and it retails for £1,400 British. The exact bike, same spec and everything, just except for the rear mech, but built onto a carbon frame, retails for £2,200. That's an £800 price difference, and this is on a hardtail.
If we were to look at full suspension comparisons, then that price difference can seem more varied. In some cases it grows to well over £1,000, but in others it shrinks. For example, the Propane Tyre top-end carbon is around the £8,244 mark, yet the identical aluminium version is only £600 cheaper at £7,644.
Let's dive into it even further then, Neil. Say you had about £3,000. Now, for that money, you could get a carbon frame with some lower spec parts, or an aluminium frame but with top-end spec parts.
Then the question becomes, of course, do you value the so-called high-end material of carbon, or do you value the components more? And the question is, can you feel the difference between carbon and aluminium frames on the trail?
The next one is a bit of a tricky subject, and it's comfort. Is one more comfortable than the other? It is, of course, a really hard thing to try and prove because there's just so many variables. Cockpit setup, tyres, wheels, pressures, suspension, all alter the comfort of a bike. So narrowing it down to a material makes it very tricky.
Well, Rich, we've got very similar bikes. In a perfect world, we would have lined it up so we had exactly the same bikes with Canyon, with different build. But tell us about your bike.
Well, yes, it's not a perfect world, sadly, but I have got the Canyon Spectral 125 CF9 edition. This is full carbon, carbon wheels, carbon bars, carbon cranks. Now, this currently is 4,289 British pounds and weighs 13.75 kilograms.
Okay, whereas I am riding the Spectral 29er, the Fabio Wimner limited edition. It's a cheaper build. It comes in at 2,999. Is that right? Is that too many nines? Almost £3,000, and it weighs 15.3 kilograms. Aluminium frame and wheels. It does have carbon bars.
Okay, so just shy of 1,300 quid cheaper.
Yeah.
About 1.5 kilos heavier.
A little bit heavier,
okay.
Yeah. Before we head out and ride these bikes, let's dig into a few more of the technical properties of both of them.
Carbon bikes can have some great comfort advantages over their metal counterparts by actually absorbing small bumps and shocks and vibrations within the ground. And frame builders do this by building in a certain amount of flex within the frame. And a great example of this is sort of the current crop of XC bikes, where they have flex stays instead of pivots. That's essentially the frame moving instead of rotating around a pivot.
Well, I did a video on this recently. Carbon fibre is often seen as the stiffer material, whereas aluminium offers more flex and compliance. And actually, I looked at the top World Cup downhill races to see what they rode. Turns out, in conclusion, that a lot of downhill racers, if they're riding a carbon fibre frame, then they'll run the aluminium rims to get some compliance there, and vice versa. If they've got carbon rims, then they'll pretty much always ride an aluminium frame. The only people that didn't do that is the Santa Cruz team, who ride carbon frame and wheels. So flex can be designed in, whether carbon or aluminium, but can you actually feel it out on the trail? I think maybe only the more experienced riders who've ridden lots of different bikes can feel some difference, but I think it's more apparent on hardtails. Aluminium hardtails are sturdy, built for probably playful riding, whereas carbon hardtails are light and fast and probably better for cross-country riding. Cross-country bikes are all about efficiency, weight and speed, and this is where carbon can excel. As frames can be made more rigid, this allows more power to be transferred through the cranks and therefore more efficient. Just remember, that's not always a good thing.
All right, Neil, let's talk about weight. Now, there's a bit of a clear winner here in the form of carbon, right?
Yeah, there's a pretty decent chunk of difference between our two bikes, but obviously that includes the components as well.
Yes. Now, if you were to narrow it down to just a frame, when it comes to a hardtail, you're looking at about a 200 to 300 gram difference. So if we scale that up to a full sus, then that becomes a little bit of a bigger difference, if you like. It's 600 to 800 grams.
But I guess same as kind of the flex and stiffness argument, lightweight doesn't mean everything. What you gain in sort of climbing efficiency, you may lose in build strength, but also less momentum.
If a manufacturer was to build a frame as stiff as possible, yes, it might be fast, it might be efficient, and it might be very light, but it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable to ride, especially for long periods of time. You're going to feel every little bump, every vibration through that, and it can actually be really fatiguing. Manufacturers are able to change the thickness and the layup of the carbon in certain areas to actually tune just how stiff it is in certain parts and how much compliance there is as well.
On the other hand, aluminium in general could be less stiff but more durable, although stiffness can be designed in, much like carbon frames, with sort of the tube diameters and things like that. But what some people might say is less stiff could also be called more compliant. And these bikes will kind of flex in the ways that you do want to take out some of the roughness from the trail, as we saw in that downhill comparison when I'm looking at what they're using. So what material you use does come down to what type of riding you want to prioritise. So if you're a racer or a performance rider or a cross-country rider, then that carbon fibre weight to stiffness ratio probably plays into your favour. That might be a good choice for you. Whereas if you are a bit of a park rat, you enjoy a playful ride, then aluminium might suit your type of riding. Plus, if you factor in the cost and the durability, that might make the alloy bike a good choice. A good quality aluminium frame with lovely welds like that is durable and reliable. Rich, over to you for your side of the debate whilst I nip off and do some jumps.
All right, Neil, you crack on for a ride. You're not needed on this bit anyway. Now, whilst some would say that durability might be a weakness of carbon frames, and that obviously when they do sustain damage, it can be more permanent, that's not always the case. Let's talk fragility. Now, people think that carbon frames are more fragile than aluminium frames, and well, that's not the case anymore. Improved carbon layup, improved carbon itself, and better frame protection mean that actually they're absolutely fine. They're able to take big hits themselves. However, crash either one of those hard enough and you're going to break the frame no matter what. It just takes different points to get there. Just bear in mind that not all carbon frames are created equal. The same brand might make two different carbon frames in slightly different versions, one being slightly better than the other, and that you pay for what you get. Cheaper frames may not be made to the same high standards that some premium frames are. However, that's not always the case. Durability can change up though, so the lifespan of a carbon frame can be about 20 years, providing it's not had any massive impacts or smashes or knocks or anything like that. Aluminium, on the other hand, about 5 to 10, but obviously this changes and is always changing as well when you think of the different materials being used and their manufacturing processes. The perks of aluminium, it has the potential to be recycled, whereas carbon, well, that's just going up in landfill.
All right, I think it's time to do a swap.
Ah, sick! Oh, it's so small. I mean, it is a very quiet, smooth ride, and I don't know if that's down to the carbon and this being aluminium.
Right, dropping into this sort of downhill trail, it's pretty smooth to begin with, and then it does get more techie rough, some kind of berms with compressions in them, so this is going to be quite interesting to see how the carbon bike feels.
That was a bit of an eye-opener.
Well, we didn't ride for very long, but what are your first impressions of the aluminium bike?
Well, I'll be honest, it's been a fair while since I have ridden an aluminium bike regrettably, actually.
Too pro nowadays.
I don't know about that. Maybe too much time on XC bikes, but it was an eye-opener. I really actually do think, and we'll take this with a pinch of salt because it's not quite the right size and stuff, obviously, but it was very quiet, it was smooth, it wasn't a fatiguing ride. I didn't feel exhausted riding it.
Yeah, it gets quite rough, that trail, and I love carbon. At the top, actually, this bike felt super responsive. When you're moving it around, it feels fast.
Yeah.
What you gain there, I think you lose. You don't lose, it just feels rougher in the rougher sections. I think, obviously, it's not as compliant. I think I'm with the downhillers when I sort of did that data thing. I think for kind of trail bike, like 140mm travel and above, I will go vice versa. If I've got a carbon frame, I like pairing them with aluminium rims. That's probably my favoured combo, to be fair.
Okay.
Whereas I think for like short travel bikes, 120 and below XC bikes, of course,
100%,
the more carbon, the better for those racers. But also I think for that kind of application of just day to day, I think it's good.
Weight and stiffness sort of reigns supreme there, doesn't
Yeah,
it, really?
I think so. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, let us know what you think in the comments down below. Are you carbon throughout? Are you aluminium throughout? Or are you not too sure and now a bit clearer maybe after this video?
I wonder if you think carbon is too expensive. Let us know in the comments down below and we'll try and jump in there and try and answer some of your questions while you have them.
Yeah. See ya.